morning. Thanks for being here. On behalf of the Embassy of Japan, I welcome you to the Japan Information and Culture Center. This event is a joint project of the Japanese American Citizens League DC chapter, the Asian American Legal Defense and Education Fund, and the Embassy of Japan. It arose out of a casual conversation that Phil Nash, Julie Abo, and I had in March. Phil had introduced us to the Enemy Alien Files exhibit at the University of Maryland, which gave us an idea of a seminar featuring Japanese Americans of legal profession who devoted their lives to advancing and protecting the civil rights of Japanese Americans and other communities in the United States. I credit my co-conspirators for the development of the initial ideas into reality. I'm grateful also to the distinguished panelists for making time to join us for this event. I'm thrilled to learn from their perspectives. The achievements of Japanese American jurists in the years leading up to the redress should be revisited with a renewed sense of appreciation, especially at this moment of division, not just in this country, but around the globe. We need to draw wisdom from how their arguments have shaped the minds of people and how that persuaded the political leaders to rectify the injustice of the past. We may be able to find clues to guide us in navigating the present and future difficulties. The Embassy of Japan is committed to working closely with the Japanese American community in an effort to nurture a more robust bilateral relationship between the two countries. We look forward to future opportunities to bring meaningful programs and exhibits of interest to this community and beyond. Thank you.
Hi, good morning. My name is Phil Tajitsu Nash, and I'm the co-president of the Asian American Legal Defense and Education Fund. I'd like to thank Minister Ai and Julie Abo for putting this program together, and to the JACL, to the Embassy of Japan, the 1882 Foundation, and the Chinese American Citizens Alliance for helping to co-sponsor this. This event kicks off the 50th anniversary year of the Asian American Legal Defense and Education Fund. You can believe it, I've been around for 45 of those 50 years. And it's quite amazing when you look back from half a century to see how things have evolved, how the law has evolved, and how your country has evolved. You can go to aaldef.org if you want to read more about that. But basically, I hope to spend this year celebrating not just one organization, but many organizations, many people, all of us who are out there in the social justice ecosystem, including our distinguished honorees, people trying to bring peace and justice to the world. Because don't forget, at its best, law is like the umpire in a game. You can play a game, but if you have no umpire, then anybody can make their own rules. And sometimes things don't work out the way you want, but we as lawyers help to put some rules into the system and hopefully change it, and by being inside the system, as our distinguished honorees have been, they've helped to make tremendous change in this country. I want to remind everyone that this is a celebration of legacy lawyers, but not the legacy lawyers. I've received emails from some friends saying, why these people? What about all the other people? And you know what? There is no end. Right here in DC, I can think of Japanese American lawyers. In Philly, in New York, all over the country. There are many people who, by my definition, are legacy lawyers, because their legacy is they're doing good at the time they're living, and the good lives on beyond them. And I'm sure the people who are here would qualify by that definition. I'd like to also send a shout out to some resources that I hope you will follow up at the Japanese American National Museum, at Densho, at the National Japanese American Historical Society, all places where you can get more information about these people and some of the other people I'll be talking about in a second. Now, when we talk about the history of Japanese American lawyers, there have been Japanese American lawyers for over 100 years. The problem was the earliest one, the Issei, the people who came here as Japanese citizens, couldn't practice law. And so there were restrictions on them, and I just want to talk about two of them because I think their stories are quite exemplary. Takuji Yamashita was born in Ehime province in 1874 and came to Tacoma, Washington. And amazingly, he graduated from Tacoma High School and then went on to the University of Washington and graduated from their law school in 1902. And think about it, how many of you native English-speaking people here could go over to Japan or any other country and master the language and master things enough to be able to graduate from their law school? So Yamashita-san passed the bar exam, and then he filed naturalization papers to become naturalized U.S. Citizen, because that was the law at the time. And he was denied that, and so he, as a recent college law graduate, imagine this, a recent college graduate, took a case up to the Supreme Court of Washington, where he lost. He was not allowed to become a lawyer. But it took a lot of chutzpah to like go and take your case all the way up, and saying, I passed the bar just like these other people. I deserve to practice. And remember that in 1790 we had a census. We had a notion in the law that if you were an alien ineligible for citizenship, that was the way, instead of saying, we hate Japanese, we hate Chinese, they didn't have to say that. They said, if you are an alien ineligible to citizenship, you cannot own land, you cannot practice certain professions and other things. And that form of discrimination didn't end until 1952, within the lifetimes of people sitting in this room. So we have seen some very difficult things, and unfortunately, Yamashita-san never became a lawyer. He worked as a businessman, a hotel keeper, a strawberry farmer, and then in 1922 he tried to challenge the alien land laws in Washington State and in a number of other states in the West, which had restrictive covenants, which had other ways of encumberancing their property, and he lost. But the second person I'm going to talk about, Sei Fuji, actually helped to win and overturn those onerous laws. So in 1952, Yamashita-san became a U.S. citizen, and finally, on the third try in 1966, Washington voters got rid of their alien land laws, and finally in 1973, the U.S. Supreme Court allowed people to practice law who are not U.S. citizens. So just think about that, 1973, how many of you were alive at that time? I remember one of my law school classmates who was from China, who was saying, I'm not sure I'll be able to practice. And somebody looked it up and said, yes, the Supreme Court ruled recently you'll be able to practice. This woman was just as smart as I was, probably smarter. And she couldn't think about practicing because she was going to be prevented by this law. So Yamashita-san lived through the camps. He went to Tule Lake and Minidoka, and finally at the end of his life he went back to Japan and died there at age 84 in 1959. Luckily, the State Bar of Washington honored him in March 2001 and gave him a posthumous entry into the legal profession. Too late for him to practice. The second person, Issei, I want to mention, someone named Sei Fuji, was born in 1882 in Shuto, Japan, now Yamaguchi, moved to the U.S. in 1903, graduated from the USC Gould School of Law, and again, he was not allowed to practice because he was, quote, of the Mongolian race. So again, here's another very bright guy. He went on to become the editor of the Kashu Mainichi, a very important publication, and he was detained during the war, but he managed to fight thanks to one of his law school classmates, somebody named Marion Wright, and they brought a number of legal challenges, including a case that all of you should read about, Sei Fuji versus the United States, which was the one that helped to overturn California's alien land law in 1952. Now, I don't have time to get into the whole history of the case, but the bottom line is he and his classmate were way ahead of their time. They brought the typical 14th Amendment challenge, equal protection, But also they said, hey, the U.S. is a signatory to this UN Charter on Human Rights. Why don't we bring that into our case? And they were able to prevail at an intermediate level. In the end, they were not able to prevail. But again, that kind of innovative thinking, saying not just domestic law, we're part of a legal universe in the whole world that should look at human rights. And unfortunately, even today, we haven't gotten to the point where the UN Declaration of Human Rights is universally applied everywhere. Anyway, the story is sad here again. He received his citizenship in 1954 and died 51 days later of a heart attack, but luckily in 2017, Seifuji was granted a posthumous law license. And you can read more about this. The Little Tokyo Historical Society and others have written about this. So when we get to the next generation, the Nisei generation, people who were born here, and when you're born here on this soil, you have U.S. citizenship. So for them, they didn't have that problem of being of the Mongolian race. But still, there was all kinds of discrimination. And at the same time, within their own families, there was the pressure saying, well, you're going to face discrimination. Why don't you help us here on the family farm? And by the way, English is not your native language. You should, be aware they're going to discriminate. Why don't you go into science? Why don't you go into mathematics, something where they can't discriminate against you? But luckily, many of the Nisei, including my mom and others, said, well, we were born here. We're American citizens by birth, and we speak English fluently. So a number of them went on to practice law. And we can talk about many of them. I'd like to just focus on a few. There were some very famous legislators. When I first came here to DC to work on the redress movement, I remember looking up to Daniel Inouye, Spark Matsunaga, Robert Matsui, Patsy Mink, one of my heroes, is going to be talked about by one of our panelists here. But these were attorneys who managed to take that legal profession and go into the legislative realm and use that knowledge not only to improve the laws, but also to bring that legal knowledge back to our Japanese American and Asian American communities. Another name that I hope you will resonate to is Frank Chuman, who wrote a book called The Bamboo People back in 1981. And it was the first time that somebody wanted to pull together the information about the laws that affected Japanese Americans specifically, but Asian Americans more specifically. And remember, every time you celebrate APA Heritage Month, you're always told to celebrate this wonderful person, this wonderful skater, nuclear physicist, whatever. And our history is about celebration. But there are actually three parts of our history. It's about some of the discrimination that Yamashita and Fuji experienced. And it's about these heroic individuals who worked with their communities to overcome this discrimination. And then, yes, we get to the point where we have people worthy of being honored, like our panelists here and others. Another Nisei who was an attorney was Minoru Yasui. And his name is on one of the cases, and you've probably heard the story. Here's a young whippersnapper walking up and down the streets of Portland, Oregon, in his pocket he's got his birth certificate and proof that he is of Japanese ancestry, and the policeman says, excuse me, you're out here after the curfew, which has been put on Japanese Americans. And Yasui says, yes, that's true. I am Japanese American. Here's the proof. I'd like you to arrest me so I can challenge this law. And the officer said, Sonny, just go home. You seem like a nice kid. But he eventually did end up bringing a challenge, and so he's another one who we need to mention. Judge Robert Takasugi was a very famous judge in the Central District in California, a federal judge, and a mentor to many of us. So there are many, many other Nisei lawyers. In the interest of time, I'm not going to get into too much depth, but I do want to mention some of the Sansei lawyers that you see here and elsewhere. We need to start, obviously, with those who worked on the Japanese American redress cases, the Korematsu, Hirabayashi, and Yasui. You've all heard the name of Dale Minami, Don Tamaki, Eric Yamamoto, Peggy Nagai, Lorraine and Catherine Banai, Karen Kai, Donna Kumare, Leon Miyasato. And don't forget, there are many non-Japanese Americans who worked on this. Peter Irons, Rob Resky, Ed Chan, Mike Wong, and people in Seattle and Portland also. So these were our heroes, my heroes. As I was an East Coast person, I did what I could to help. I went around and testified and helped others testify and worked on things. But these people did the hefty lifting in terms of the coram nobis cases to bring challenges to the wrongful cases that were brought in the 1940s, and these lawyers helped to bring and win cases in the 1980s. At the same time, many of us were working on the redress movement. I remember working with Stuart, who was on the inside there, and some of the things that were happening. It was great to have people on the inside who understood the process and who could explain it to people, who made sure that the inside people understood some of the needs of the community on the outside, and we'll be talking more about that. When it comes to community legal services, some lawyers are out there actually doing the day-to-day work. One of my heroes is Bruce Iwasaki, a legal aid and legal service attorney who's now a judge on the Superior Court of Los Angeles County. Dennis Hayashi worked with Nihonmachi Legal Outreach, the Asian Law Caucus, and others, and now he's a judge in the Superior Court of Alameda County. Paul Igasaki and Karen Narasaki, lawyers right here in DC, have done work with the JCL, have gone on to work with the EEOC and other agencies. So again, there's no end to the people who've done good work. Another one of my heroes who's passed on is Rose Matsui Ochi, who is co-counsel of record on the very famous case Serrano versus Priest, which challenged the unfair way our schools are financed. Don't forget that many of our schools still are financed by the local property tax, so if you live in an area where there's poor communities and they don't have resources, your school is not as good in the inner city, for example, versus the suburbs. So she was very ahead of her time helping to bring that case. So she's Japanese American, but also working for equal rights and equal education for all people. Paul Uehara, who's at the Civil Rights Division at the Department of Justice, has been a trailblazer for limited English proficient people. Robin Toma, working in the LA Commission on Human Rights. Jeff Adachi was somebody who was a public defender in San Francisco. On and on and on. These people who are devoting their lives to legal services and helping people of all backgrounds understand what the law is and make sure it applies to them. And finally, I want to do a shout out to my colleagues in the teaching profession. I remember when I started teaching in the mid-1980s, there were maybe 10 of us who were teaching in the various law schools. And now there's a listserv with over 200 people of all Asian backgrounds. And it's wonderful to see that they are pursuing whatever their interests are. I remember when I was first teaching, they said, don't do anything about civil rights, women's rights, gay rights, don't write about the property law of such and such. That's how you get tenure. And now I look around and I see people getting tenure with whatever they want to write about. So things have changed for the better. Shout out to Eric Yamamoto again, who did the redress, Mari Matsuda and Neil Gotanda, who are two of the lawyers who were at the start of the critical race theory movement. And this was in the law school before it got taken over and given another meaning, and nobody quite knows what it is. Kenji Yoshino is a scholar, formerly at Yale and NYU, who's a very famous human rights person, and on and on and on. There are so many people who are going into the legal profession and then into the legal teaching profession. And again, that's good for us as a Japanese American community and good for human rights worldwide, because we need thinking people, caring people everywhere. I wanted to give a quick shout out to the non-Japanese American lawyers who have helped our community. Wayne Collins is somebody everyone should know about. Google his name. He was very instrumental in helping the Japanese Americans, the Japanese Latin Americans, and others. There's Edward Ennis, who was very active with the ACLU. He was a lawyer at the Justice Department during World War II. And I want to shout out Eric Muller, my friend and colleague at UNC, who just wrote a new book called Lawyer, Jailer, Ally, Foe, Complicity and Conscience in Americans' World War II concentration camps. And he talks about project attorneys at the Wartime Relocation Authority during World War II. These are people who weren't making the policy on a national level. They were on the ground, nominally helping the people who were heading each of the camps that the Japanese Americans were in, but at the same time giving free legal advice and legal services to people who may have lost their farm, needed to pay taxes, all kinds of things. And Eric does a wonderful job on looking at those nuances of exactly what is the lawyer's role. How can we help people? How are we hurting people at times when we do things, when we don't do things? Should people resign their job out of protest? Should they stay inside and try and work hard on something? These are key issues that Eric explores very expertly. I also want to do a shout out to A.L. Wirren, Abraham Lincoln Wirren of the ACLU of Southern California, and Fred Okren, who helped challenge some of the alien land laws during World War II. An African-American attorney named Hugh Macbeth deserves to have his name in history, and I hope you will Google him and read about him. There's a wonderful article that historian Greg Robinson wrote in a 2007 piece in the Nichi Bay Times. Hugh Macbeth was an African-American who grew up with Japanese Americans in Los Angeles, and he pushed to not incarcerate the Japanese Americans, and when they came back, he pushed to help bring them back. He was very instrumental in helping to challenge some of the alien land laws and other things. And again, we don't always see an African-American name mentioned in terms of helping the Japanese American community. So there's a lot more history that I hope each of you will look at. And this is why I say that we need to celebrate legacy attorneys, and not just the people here, but this whole constellation of people who are in this room, who are in this country right now, and who have passed but who continue to inspire us. So I'm going to stop at this point. I'd like to come back and have a conversation with my three distinguished colleagues and Minister I, and we're going to be asking them some questions that are very straightforward. I don't enjoy conversations where we just say, okay, tell me what is the holding of the Oyama versus California case. And I did that in law school. It's it's interesting if you're a law student, but here I want to take this lifetime of learning that these three lawyers have done and ask them to think about some questions that are a little bit deeper. First of all, I'd like to start by asking, who is one Japanese American attorney who inspired you as a young person? And I would first like to start by introducing them and then have Shirley answer that, because Shirley Ann Higuchi is here, and she is the Associate Chief for Professional Practice at the American Psychological Association. She's also chair of the Heart Mountain Wyoming Foundation, and significantly, she's also a former president of the DC District of Columbia Bar Association. And she can tell you a little bit more about how she's taken some of her colleagues from DC out to Heart Mountain. She's been part of the Federal Law Enforcement Nominating Commission. She's written a book, Setsuko Secret, Heart Mountain, and the Legacy of the Japanese American Incarceration. So she's one of those all-around people who you could sit down and listen to for hours, but we're going to ask her just to start right now. Who is one person that inspires you?
Well, I don't know if this microphone is working. Is it working now?
Can you hear Shirley?
I can hear her.
Okay.
The person that I think that has most inspired me has been Judge Raymond Uno. And I write about him in my book and the relationship that I've had with him my entire life. He's one of the honorees today. Judge Raymond Uno was incarcerated at Heart Mountain with my parents during World War II as children. I mean, they were only 10 years old, so you can imagine how traumatic that was. And he had lost everything in his family. My parents' family lost everything, and here they were at Heart Mountain for 3 or so years. And there was a relationship that I think Raymond had with my mother, where he had really admired her a lot. And I kind of heard these stories as a child that they had a crush on each other and all this. So very early on, Judge Uno, Raymond Uno, was kind of a presence in my life, even when I was a kid. I was able to track his career through the Japanese American Citizens League because he quickly rose as the first ethnic minority judge in Utah, which you can imagine that's a pretty big feat for Utah to get Raymond in that position. But when I look back at his life, I look how much he had suffered. His father was a World War I hero, and he fought on behalf of this country, and his father with his uniform was incarcerated in Heart Mountain. Here he served this country, yet he was incarcerated. And so it didn't really make a lot of sense. And Raymond's father was very helpful in camp. He was part of the USO. He would actually greet outsiders to come in, like Senator Simpson's family that lived locally. And then one night he went to bed at around age 50 and he never woke up. He died in camp. So what happened to Raymond at that point is he essentially became an orphan because his mother took the sister and after the war lived in a woman's boarding home, and Raymond couldn't go there. So he began working on the railroad at age 15 and 16. And he had gotten hit in the head, he had been injured on the railroad tracks. It's a very difficult job. But he never let all those horrible things that happened to him ever slow him down. He was tenacious, and I'm sure it had to do with his roots and his connection to his Japanese heritage that he never gave up. He went to social work school, he helped the community in Salt Lake City, he ended up going to law school at night, and he slowly rose up in Salt Lake City as a very prolific lawyer and judge. And to be quite honest, he's been connected with me my entire life. He married my son and daughter-in-law, who are in the audience today, after my mother passed away. And when my mother passed away in 2005, he was at the funeral speaking on her behalf and what she had done with Heart Mountain. And we really came full circle because he's still alive. He lives near my father in Salt Lake City. He's 92. He's deteriorating like my father. And I have this vision that one day I'm going to wake up and they're both going to be gone at the same time, which is going to be hard. But he called me, I think it was about 15 years ago, an angel. And the reason why he saw me as an angel is he knew that he could rest and help me help Heart Mountain continue. And I picked up the baton from Judge Uno and I continued on.
Wow. Thank you so much, Shirley. So we've now brought two of our honorees into the room with Judge Uno. And again, we wanted to make sure we honored one of the Nisei, so that's why we're honoring him. And we do have a plaque for him that his family is going to be receiving. So the next person I'd like to answer that question, again, these are all three of my heroes too. So Erica Marks, who works currently at the White House, but I think of her in all of her other capacities that I've known her. She has been in private practice, she's worked in the nonprofit sector, she was the Assistant Secretary for Congressional and Intergovernmental Relations at the Housing and Urban Development Department. She's had leadership roles in the Anti-Defamation League, and she's worked on the Hill with Senator Duckworth, Senator Akaka, and Senator Majority Leader Reid. So welcome, Erica, and who's your hero?
I'm going to answer the question, but because I'm a proud American, but also fiercely proud of my Japanese heritage, I'm going to start with two apologies. You're welcome, Minister. Thank you. The first is I do want to honor the legacy lawyers that you've assembled here. I am their beneficiaries. It's Stuart and Shirley and Phil. You really have been trailblazers. I did not know you when I was young to be inspired by you. You were not yet lawyers then. And so now I'm going to say, again, my second apology for those of you who love and know the Japanese language. I'm going to butcher this because I'm a Yonsei from Hawaii. So I'm going to say Okage-sama de, which I know, I'm so sorry, I'll cover your ears if that hurts. But, growing up, and it may mean something different from us in Hawaii than it does in Japan. Because it's a principle, and it doesn't matter what ethnicity you are or what walk of life you are. We are who we are because of you. Your shadow falls upon us, and we're obligated because of that. And so that's I want to honor you all here, Okage-sama de, for the legacy that you've led, the legacy that I benefit from, and a legacy that I hope to replicate and build upon too. So now, Professor Doctor, I will answer your question. My youthful inspiration I didn't know her personally the way I know these legacy lawyers here, in the way that I think some people's testimonials will be. But she was, fun fact, the first candidate that I campaigned for. I was 10 years old, and she was running for city council. And I don't know if people could raise their hand or throw me a shaka if you're from Hawaii. It'll make more sense to you that my mom would drop me off to do sign waving for her. And I would also clean up after backyard fundraising barbecues. And then my mom would pick me up and she would make sure that I took all of the leftovers home. So we would eat spam musubi and haukia cake, and kalua pig and cabbage for the next couple of weeks until the next fundraiser. So that is my origin story with her. Again, I can't claim her as a mentor as much as a role model, but what she has done, what she went through in order to do what she's done is an inspiration. And it's not a little known story, it's a larger known story. But for me personally and professionally, the fact that she left the warm embrace of a very multicultural society, and one of the reasons why I campaigned for her, I didn't know I was Asian American, progressive, or an activist, because kind of most people in Hawaii are. She moved to the continental U.S. And faced discrimination that was not unique to her, but she held it deeply. She came back home to Hawaii and to finish her schooling, and with the intention of being a medical doctor, couldn't get into medical school. I think it was a dozen medical schools that she applied for. She felt and experienced and probably knew in her heart that it was because of racism and sexism. We now know that that's reaffirmed. So she went to law school instead, came back to the continent, studied law, went back home to Hawaii, could not sit for the bar because of who she was married to. So she used her legal skills to advocate to have the right to sit for the bar in the territory of Hawaii. Passed the bar, first Japanese American woman to pass the bar. Could not find a job because she was married with a child, even in Hawaii, after returning to the homeland. And so these are the types of things that she toiled under and fought against for her own personal and family reasons, and it built her into this public servant that led her to be first ever. And I actually back up a little bit. All of these first evers that you can see, pages and pages of bullet point lists of the first ever that she represented, including being the first woman of color ever to serve in the U.S. Congress. But she was also the first girl to be elected student body president at her high school in Maui. So I mean, you see these things that she struggled with, facing discrimination for a variety of what we would now call intersectional reasons, fighting back, finding her voice, and then using that platform when she returns to the Congress for the second time to build landmark legislation, to transform the halls of Congress. She was a fighter for what we now know commonly as environmental protection, for caregivers. And the one that I'll focus on is Title IX, which was a bill that would prohibit gender discrimination for federally funded academic institutions. The reason why I want to focus on that is that because she faced that herself. And nobody, I don't know, in the Congress knew about it. And if they knew about it, I'm not sure that they cared about it. She knew about it, and this was her lived experience, and she cared about it enough to fight for it and to get it enacted into law in 1972. And that initial bill became a building block for breakthroughs for women and women of color throughout the country for generations. So that bill that would have denied funding for federal grants if there was a problem with gender discrimination, just blanketly, simple language but open, beautifully crafted, led to amazing innovations in women in athletics at academic institutions, for breakthroughs in medicine and legal professions and their training, to be used for sexual harassment and sexual abuse services on campuses. I mean, again, she had that nugget of a vision that she built out. I mean, this is just one example. It was only, again, later after I signed waving for her Chavez on corner of Veritania Street that I learned about her legacy and her impact. I came to Washington, D.C. After high school, it was when I realized her power in the halls of Congress. And Stuart and Philly, you're going to remember this, what her reputation was in the Congress. I mean, make no mistake, she was little and she was quiet until she wasn't, right? And her reputation as the chair of the Budget Committee and the bipartisan legislation that she was able to enact into law was for the good of everyone through her tiny platform and through her own personal experience. And in movement, we talk about, my job previous to rejoining the government this round was as a professional anti-feminist. And so in that, it was on my card and everything. And what we say is, if you can see her, you can be her. And it is, I mean, the representation matters, not just because it's good for a photo op, but because it informed the way that she saw policy and the way she enacted policy and the way she implemented it and expanded it out. So that's my story. And I did steal her from you as you so I'll yield there.
Yes, in our discussions, we were saying who would be the person that we would focus on as our inspiration, and Patsy Mink was actually one of my inspirations. Just to follow up on that very briefly, I found out about Judge Bill Maritani when I was just entering the legal profession. He was a JCL person. He wrote the East Wind column. I didn't realize at the time how much of a civil rights lawyer he was. He had actually been the legal counsel for JCL in the 1960s. He encouraged JCL to take strong positions on civil rights. He himself went down to the South, helping to register voters after 1965. You think now, well, of course, everybody can vote. We have to have special legislation to have the black community vote in a lot of the South, and we needed lawyers and other people of goodwill to go down and help them register. He was there at a place that was firebombed, and he luckily was not killed at that time. He and other Japanese, Asian Americans, they were involved in the freedom rides at the time. We forget, we say Asian Americans had our own history. No, we were embedded in the history of this country. And one thing that I personally want to thank Bill Maritani for is that he had the foresight in the 1967 case, Loving versus Virginia. Anybody who is married interracially or who has a friend or family member or who loves someone who is of a different race than you can thank Bill Maritani and thank the Lovings because they had the foresight to say, hey, I love this person, I want to marry them, it doesn't matter what they look like or anything else. And JCL was an amicus on the brief, but amazingly, he was allowed to speak to the Supreme Court. So in 1967, he was the first Japanese American to speak to the Supreme Court of the United States. And luckily, whether through his persuasiveness or something else, the Lovings prevailed, and laws that forbade interracial marriage were struck down all across the country. So that's why he was my second hero, aside from Patsy Mink. But I'm glad my distinguished colleague here has raised up Patsy. Our third speaker, and we're going to, after this, we're going to just speak extemporaneously, but I did want to introduce people in this way. Stuart Ishimaru has been somebody who I've known and admired basically my whole life. We were in law school about the same time. He took a number of various very important positions. He's always been, a very friendly guy, but also very respected in every venue that he's worked in, and he's worked in many. He most recently was the inaugural director of the Office of Minority and Women Inclusion at the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau, but he also was the commissioner and acting chairman at the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission, and an attorney and professional staff member at the Department of Justice, the House Armed Services, House Judiciary Committees. If you know Washington, these are very difficult positions to get. You have to have stellar credentials, you have to have an ethos of hard work, and Stuart is all of those things. At the same time, he seems like Mr. Easygoing, and he is easygoing somewhat. But so I just want to again shout out Stuart and say thank you for your lifetime of achievement. And who's the one Japanese American attorney who inspired you?
Well, Phil, I think that there we go. Green light came. It's like magic.
first came to town, which was 40 plus years ago, right, there didn't seem like there were very many Japanese Americans, Asian Americans, and certainly in the law. I came back to go to law school here at George Washington, and there were 4 of us, I think, Asian Americans in our class, another Japanese American, two others, and a Chinese American woman. And that was it. Georgetown had more because a lot of Hawaii folks went to Georgetown Law School. But there weren't many, and there weren't many Japanese American lawyers that I knew growing up. I think, thinking back in San Jose, I knew one, right, who was our family lawyer, I think. But I'm not even sure if my parents had a family lawyer because they didn't have much of a need for one. But he was the one who they would call. So growing up, I didn't know lawyers, really. Yet I wanted to be a lawyer, and I think a lot of that came from the civil rights movement and the era of the 60s, right? You wanted social change, you wanted to see improvement. When I first learned about the camps, right, my parents were young. They were in high school and junior high at the start of the war. So when they talked about camp, I thought it was camp. I thought, my father had a wooden plate that he made in camp that sat on top of our refrigerator. And I thought, well, camp was a fun place to be. And I quickly learned that it wasn't a fun place to be, and that there was a lot more to that story. And being a child of the 60s, you figure, why did this happen, right? How could this have happened? How do we change our system so it doesn't happen again? And that led me to the law. And when I was working back here, my first summer from law school, I was an intern at the Commission on Wartime Relocation and Internment of Civilians, the federal commission that was set up to study the camps and to make recommendations for what the government should do about it. And it was a fascinating summer, and I helped them set up their hearings here in Washington and around the country. I met our friend Aiko Herzog Yoshinaga and her husband Jack Herzog, who taught me about the National Archives and the records and how to find things, and Aiko was a master of this. And from that, I learned about the Quorum Novus lawyers, or the soon-to-be Quorum Novus lawyers, the young lawyers working to challenge the government's actions during World War II. And I think when I think back, those are the lawyers, that cadre of Asian American lawyers, many Japanese Americans, who turned into my heroes, into my inspiration. And you had named many of them earlier. And they did something that, frankly, I don't think anyone thought was possible, to challenge and to win years later. The whole notion that it was okay to incarcerate Japanese Americans during the war. I remember during law school, they talked about the cases being sort of settled law, and that's the way it was. And a few years later, the challenge that the Quorum Novus lawyers made was held up and changed that law many years after the fact, but it indeed made that change. So those are my heroes. Those are the ones that inspired me to do the various jobs that I've been able to hang on to over the course now of many years.
Well, thank you all. I'd like to ask a second question, but not just to one person. Let's start to have a conversation. And in thinking about this program, was inspired by a book I read a long time ago by Dennis Ogawa called Kodomo no Tamani, For the Sake of the Children. And when you said something in Japanese, that it just popped back into my mind, because a lot of what we do is to for ourselves, for our families, but it's really for future generations of people. How can we vaccinate those future generations against injustice, against the type of things we dealt with? So I'd like each of you to describe a situation that you had to deal with and how you overcame it, or maybe didn't overcome it, maybe later on you dealt with it, and how, what lesson can younger people take from that? Because, the world didn't start today. It started, a long time ago when we were there, and even going back to Yamashita and St. Fuji and these others dealt with things that we didn't know. So take it away. Anybody want to talk about a situation you've had to deal with and how you overcame it?
I guess I have to go first again. Well, this is a tough one, but I'll tell the story anyways. When I first got out of law school in Washington, D.C., I worked for a national law firm here, and a really wonderful partner, Tom Farah, thought it'd be a great idea to bring Shirley to Salt Lake City because her parents were living there. My dad was teaching at the university. And the client that we had was a large healthcare system that was a Mormon-run organization. And they were going through a federal qualification, in other words, being federally qualified as an HMO. So I was really excited. I mean, this was my big chance, to break into the big times. So Tom and I went over to the building, and we walked into this really large conference room, and they were all men. There are no Asians, no minorities. And the CEO looked at me, and he said, "You're not sitting at the table, the conference table." He said, "You're going to sit over there." And in the corner, there was this 45-year-old secretary, female secretary, sitting there with a little steno pad. And he goes, "You're sitting over there." And I said, "Okay," So I went and sat next to her. I didn't, at that point, it wasn't really fully sinking in. So then all the men were at the conference table, and this other man walks in who was a medical director that wielded a lot of power for the healthcare system. And he walked in, he goes, "Why is Shirley sitting over there?" And he grabbed a chair, he dragged it to the conference table. Then he had me get up and walk all the way up to the table and sit down. And I remember it was such an uncomfortable experience being told by two men, and with all men, telling Shirley what to do, and I felt like I was caught in this war. And I sort of ignored it and let it roll off my shoulders. And I remember coming back to Washington, D.C., and the partner told everyone in the law firm what happened to me. And he said, "But to this day, I don't know if Shirley was treated like that because she's a woman or because she was Asian." So when I look back at that, obviously I remember this very well, and it affected me a lot, or I wouldn't be able to recite it from heart. But I think that what I would have done differently today, and I think not get angry, but ask why. Why are you doing this? I just need to understand. And maybe it was obvious why he was doing this, but I think putting the responsibility on the perpetrator as opposed to me sort of letting it brush off my shoulders is important. And I think I would have also talked to the man that came to defend me. And so when I look at that experience, I think it's important to always ask why. And that's what I would counsel young people and children to do, is to ask, why are you doing this to me? I think on a larger scale, I think the work that I do with the American Psychological Association, as well as with Heart Mountain, is looking to ways to bring people in, to bring in diversity, to have an open table, to allow everyone at the table to have a voice. And I hope to be able to continue to do that in the future, because I think next time, my granddaughter or my daughter-in-law walks in a room, they're not going to be the only person of color or the only woman. And that's what we need to strive for.
You remind me of another woman hero of mine named Shirley Chisholm, who was a woman from Brooklyn who was elected in the cycle right after Patsy Mink. And her famous saying was, "If there's no seat for you at the table, just bring a card chair and sit down." And I think that mindset is so important, because sometimes you do need to just say, "Hey, I do belong here, and I'm going to just put that chair there and sit." And she actually ran for president as the first African-American woman. Any other stories that are coming back?
Actually, just dovetailing off of both of you. I know that you wanted us to play off of each other too, so this is actually perfect because Auntie Shirley is one of my heroes, absolutely. And your story actually makes it unnecessary for me to tell my story, and I'm a horrible storyteller, so that's actually a lesson for you all. But when Auntie Shirley says, bring a, bring your own chair, that's not authentic to many of us. For me, I would say, in a law firm environment, which is intimidating. And so when I think about what I hope my children don't have to face because I did, but I didn't have to face the hardships that people who came before me faced, it is to find your authentic voice and to be comfortable with it and then stretch beyond that. And the way you do that is through allies like the medical director and to embrace those allies where you find them, because the other thing that I take away from a lot of other people's stories and my own experience is that we are not alone. And you don't have to do it alone. There's no shame in asking or seeking help and accepting help if it's the right help, because maybe the medical director perpetuated further harm by showcasing the fact that you've been marginalized to begin with, and educating our allies about how to be better allies without making us forcing individuals to move beyond their value system or their comfort level. When I think about my time in Big Law, and I won't name names like you did, I got tons of advice by very well-intentioned people, mostly dominant culture like partners, but also Asian American lawyers who had struggled. And they gave me very well-intentioned advice that was actually bad advice that I have learned since then to absorb, accept it for the graciousness and generosity that it was offered in, and then decide that that's not me. Like, make sure that you get to a meeting early so you get a seat at the table and try to sit as close up front as possible. Make sure you say something at every meeting, even if somebody already said that. Like, all of these types of things to make do in this dominant culture, to code switch, are anathema to me as in terms of values and the way I want to show up, the way I wish leadership had taught me. And so I can take those learnings and say thank you, because again, they wanted me to be a success, and then push it aside and say, if I'm quiet, it's because I'm listening and learning. When I say something, it's going to be deeply meaningful. If I get emotional, it's because I'm impassioned, not because I'm a hysterical woman. If I'm successful, it's not because I'm a safe model minority that people can gather around. And if that's the case, I'm not going to be the proxy for other women of color just because I'm the closest thing you've got to it. So again, allyship in the right way, and I want my children to know, and I want everybody here to know that we don't have to do it alone. And that's one of the beautiful things about the recitation of your heroes, the discussion here, is that we have to build community intention, which is why I'm so grateful to have found you all in this journey, because it doesn't happen organically unless we do it intentionally.
I don't have much to add because you guys said it well. I think the thing that really, that I wonder about going forward and about our children and their children is, how do you continue a Japanese American community going forward? You know, my kids are half Japanese and half Polish. Right? My wife was born in Warsaw. And the question of going forward, how do you make sure that they understand that they have this legacy from past, and how do you honor that, and how do you take that as a strength going forward? I think that's something that, as the Japanese American community evolves and people marry other people from other communities, right? How do you maintain your various pieces of background, and how do you use that as a strength going forward? And I think that is a challenge that people are going to have to grapple with. I can think about my kids with a Japanese last name, but my sister's daughter, whose last name is Newman, right? How will she interact? How will she relate going forward? And I think that's a challenge for us. I think by doing programs like this and having people talk about it and talking about the history that frankly isn't well known still, and people act with surprise when they hear about it. I think talking about that history, talking about what happened and why it matters going forward was really so. We were raised at a time when you didn't want to rock the ship, rock the boat. You wanted to make sure that things went smoothly, and sometimes if you weren't sat at the table, you would just suck it up and move on. And I think our children and their children will learn different lessons going forward.
You remind me, you remind me of when I first started teaching law back in 1986. I had been hired and I was going to the law school to pick up my books. And I went there during the summer and I had a leather jacket on, my hair was slicked back. I didn't look like the typical guy with, smoking a pipe with the patches on his cardigan and sweater, And so the guard stopped me at the door and said, who are you? I said, oh, well, I'm Nash, I'm one of the new professors. And he wasn't mean or anything, but he called up to the desk and they said, oh yeah, he's okay. So I went in and, I became friends with this guy for many years. And, but I mean, that presumption, that initial response of, you don't seem like the typical person I would expect to be a law professor. It happened over and over and over again. And that's why when I think about Shirley Chisholm or Patsy Mink or any of these people, even our Shirley here, being president of the DC Bar, I mean, what was it like to have people, did they make any presumptions about how well you speak English or anything else, or you had already been pretty accomplished at that point to be accepted as the president?
Well, that's a very complicated question because I think my success in Washington, D.C. was a byproduct of the incarceration experience. My parents moved to Ann Arbor, Michigan. My father was a professor there, and my mom was on autopilot to assimilate to the top of the food chain. I mean, the first Ford, Taurus and all these cars and getting a nice house and really overextending, I think, ourselves to be as American as possible. So I was very, very, very sheltered, during that period. Actually, this happened to me last night. Repeat your question, because I'm leading up to that.
Okay, so as the president of the DC Bar.
Okay. What was that like? So I think the reason why I was elected, I was the first Asian American elected president, and I think part of the reason why I was elected was because all of my experiences were with black and whites. I had no Asian friends because I didn't know any Asians, right? And so I basically hung out with blacks, I hung out with white people, I got along well with everyone, and because the white and the black individual lawyers were the power brokers in Washington, D.C., they all wanted me to be the next D.C. Bar president. So again, it's that whole allyship. I stumbled into allyship, right? I mean, I didn't want to be the only Asian, but I always was the only Asian. I was the only Asian at my law firm. I was the only Asian DC Bar president. And I guess in that way I could be seen as a trailblazer, but I think in fact it was my circumstance. I grew up in a white and black environment and had no Asian friends, had no Asian, the only Asian affiliations I had growing up were my father's doctoral students who were from Japan. So my exposure to Asian people were people from Japan who were studying in the U.S.
And that gets to an important question too about the variety of Japanese American and Asian American experiences. I mean, you talk about being in San Jose. I know you have some experience from California and from Hawaii. And I grew up in suburban New Jersey. So for me, it was very much of a suburban experience. I am still in touch with the daughter of my first grade teacher. Because my mom and my first grade teacher, Mrs. Cummings, were good friends, and I credit Mrs. Cummings with helping me to have a good experience in elementary school, because she was very progressive. I mean, now I look back on it, she was very welcoming to me as the only kid who was multiracial. I was short, I was a little awkward. I was bright enough, but to be welcomed in that way really required an authority figure. And Mr. Farrow, the principal, and Mrs. Cummings, the teacher, they really welcomed me in a way that I think was important. So that allyship, again, I didn't know the word allyship, but these people are nice to me. And then it helped to build that circle of friends. And my mom also became the PTA president, which is amazing when you think about some, under 5 foot woman in, a time when we had been at war with Japan just, a couple years before. She was one dynamo. She became a reader at the library, singing with her guitar. Yes, we did sing Kumbaya because my mom wanted to make sure I was accepted. So there's a lot of heroes like that who were not lawyers, but who made sure that we were accepted. And again, I didn't think about being the only Japanese American there. I just was. And so how does that affect you? I mean, what are your experience being in Hawaii with so many people of different backgrounds, and then being in California, and then being here in DC?
Yeah. So first of all, you are a trailblazer. Let me name that. Whether it was intentional or not, what you've done with that platform, what you've done with being the first ever for so many capacities means so much more than you even know the impact that it has on other people. Not just the ones who observe you and are looking for role models, but because of what you were able to do there. And Bill, I'm glad that you were taller. out of your awkward elementary school. So I mean, one thing that I do try to name in every instance is the privilege that I have, having grown up in Hawaii, born in San Francisco, but my childhood in so long ago that the hospital I was born in doesn't even exist anymore. But did grow up in Hawaii, where I was actually like a little bit delayed in the sense of allyship and coalition building, or what it feels like to have a lack of belonging and inclusion. It was when I moved to the continental U.S. to work, don't laugh, as a clerk typist, a GS1 clerk typist at the Department of Justice after high school.
GS1?
Yes. I got immediately promoted because my boss was mortified to get a GS1 on the staff. I wasn't even a secretary, I was an assistant to the secretary. And I had to take a typing test to get the job. But it was the first time ever that I would be the only Asian American woman, or the only Asian American, sometimes the only woman, sometimes the only person of color for years in offices, classes, and then again in offices, and then again out, I don't know, at happy hours. So my awakening was delayed because I was holding some ignorance about the struggles that my sisters and brothers on the continent or new Americans, were holding and bearing. When I think about people who grew up in non-traditional, like concentrated Asian American societies, like in the Midwest or in farmlands, or not even to mention transnational adoptees in these isolated places. And so that's why I think for me, the refrain, we are not alone, we don't need to do this alone. Allyship is ever important because we need to find each other, to strengthen each other because we're stronger together. And the assumptions people will make of me. So first of all, I'm multiple race Asian, so nobody quite knows what I am. So I know how to say, I'm so sorry, I don't know what you're saying in 8 different Asian languages, including Japanese. I presented Japanese, my name is Japanese, but, and so I'm kind of like this chameleon Asian who actually literally, even though I'm 5th generation on my Chinese and Portuguese side, 4th generation on my Japanese side, at the beginning of the pandemic, somebody hate crimed me and told me to go back to where I came from. I was like, Letterman Memorial Army Hospital doesn't exist there in San Francisco anymore. And I speak better English than you do. It's right, thank you. So there's the dark side of it in a time, and I don't mean to go way dark on this, but I mean, this is one of the reasons, this is some of the work that I do for the President and Vice President, is how easily Northeast Asian presenting people are invisible in one instance until somebody needs to be scapegoated and they're victimized in the next instance. So I'm going to tie that piece off super quickly by saying that tragedy does not define us. We are resilient and we are innovative and we also are shifting in terms of our Japanese Americanness. I think the other piece is, in terms of intentional inclusion, to recognize within the Asian American Native White and Pacific Islander collective, how powerful we are as the fastest growing racial ethnicity in this nation. We're going to be close to 23 million strong, which is like mind-boggling. And that many of the growth in that community has come since post-1965 immigration reform, where people, these are very well-educated adults and their children, came here for civil rights. You know why? Because of Black and Jewish activism. And that's how I came into the civil rights space. And Phil, you know this because this is when I met you, was through voting rights coalitions and volunteerism that were Black and Jewish spaces, not Asian American spaces. And that's where you and I found some initial fellowship when I was the executive director of the AAA when I was at the big law firm. And to honor that, and again, this is a little bit of a co-option or muddle on Ohage Sama Day, when we are invited to march on the anniversary of March on Washington, that is when we honor the blood and toil and sacrifice of Black and African American heroes who fought courageously. Some died over this. That's when we stand with them because they stand with us. And not everybody understands that. So educating even within our own collective to honor and name the differences and the beautiful diversity of the Asian American, Native, White, and Pacific Islander communities. My adjacency means that I know when to pause and when to center, let's say, a Pacific Islander voice. I'm not the proxy for a Pacific Islander voice, but I also know, and this is going to quote living legend, Dave Henderson, that if you want a friend, you need to be a friend. They've had their hands behind our back. Reverend Akaka, Senator Akaka, my old boss's big brother, marched in Selma. The reason why you see white flower lays on the dignitaries whenever they reenact Bloody Sunday is because that is a tradition that Reverend Akaka brought to him with him from Hawaii to show fellowship and oneness and how we are stronger together. And so I think that's one of the ways that we show up in these spaces. I'm going to say one last quick thing that's snarky, if that's okay. And maybe not very dignified, but I love it when people underestimate me. I love it if I'm consigned to the side of a chair, or I walk into a room and somebody says, "Sweetie, you know, I need 4 copies of this." I will take that paper, I will make the 4 copies, I will plunk it down on the desk. I will take my seat at the head of the table and convene my own meeting. I don't mind that at all. But that's power that's been built up over generations.
Right. No, and there, oh, go ahead.
Well, no, I think Shirley's point about how things have changed in town is really important. When I first started doing civil rights work after law school, or actually during law school, the question of, who do you work for? Who do you find doing the work you want to do? There weren't Asian American groups, certainly legal groups, doing this work. ALDEF was off in New York, it wasn't here. There was no one in town doing that until later in the 80s. And I got my start working at the Lawyers Committee for Civil Rights under the law as a law clerk during law school, and learning about the Black civil rights experience and learning about litigation that can move people forward and learning about allyship and how it's important to both be there and to use them as your allies going forward. And I think that experience, especially coming from California, where there were a lot of Japanese Americans and Asian Americans, not necessarily together, but there were still a critical mass of people. And then coming back here and going to the local Chinese restaurant on Capitol Hill and being served tea and a basket of bread, which I've never had before at a Chinese restaurant, although I guess in China sometimes you actually do get bread, but not the kind of French bread that they served me at the Chinese restaurant up on Capitol Hill. But it was a very, very different experience moving back here in the sense of going from a place where there were a lot of us to a place where there weren't, you could count them on one hand, literally. And in the legal profession, I remember being part of the Asian bar in the early 80s, right? As it was starting up and being on the board. And there was a literal handful of us. And we could meet in somebody's living room because nobody had access to law firm conference rooms or places like that. This was a very low-key grassroots start. And I think when I think back and with the Asian Bar Convention happening next week, and thinking about the thousands of people that will be there at some big fancy shiny hotel, and people at big firms who are partners and associates, and how that has changed over the course of my lifetime is stunning to me. But thinking back to the start, when, you know, there were a handful of us doing this work, makes a big difference.
I just want to reinforce one thing with an example that's going to embarrass my friends here. But like Shirley and me both, and me and to a certain extent, came up through dominant culture, made a success in the legal profession in this town through dominant culture, in spite of discrimination, whether it was intentional, whether it was, what do they call it, microaggressions, which are not that micro, and made successes, and the impacts that you have once you're in that scene. I just want to put some of this can be informed by your own lived experience, right? I mean, like some of the work that you did because of your parents' incarceration story during World War II is one of these legacy moments of history that you participated in and you pushed forward. But then you also, that's what I wanted to look up here, you authorized, this is an email from Jenny Yang, the creation of the National Origin Working Group before 9/11. Not very far before 9/11, but before 9/11. And because of the work that he authorized at the Department of Justice on national origin across components, once 9/11 happened, everybody was in panic and shock and rallying and trying to figure out how to deal with this unprecedented crisis. He already had a mechanism in place to translate materials into 13 languages, to go into communities to teach them about their civil rights, informed by his own experience as a Japanese American, but also a mainstream lawyer, but also a civil rights lawyer. And the reason why this came up is because we are talking about that right now, and that's why I know about this.
Well,
and that's why that's
Jenny Yang, your colleague at the White House, the person who followed me at the EEOC and later became chair of the EEOC under President Obama, has done terrific work over the years. And it was really her and the other young lawyers there who said, we need this. And being the old guy, even then, saying, well, yeah, sure we do. But no, it was important to do, and it lasted, it left a legacy, which is good. But being pushed, I think, by younger people to do things was also a very important piece. Can I say one thing? I'd be remiss if I didn't mention one of my mentors, and that was Congressman Mineta, who was not a lawyer, although I think Norm went to law school for a bit. But he was my congressman back in San Jose, and I knew Norm and his family, and he helped me sort of make it through Washington to get started. He was a good friend of my first boss here, Congressman Don Edwards, who they had neighboring seats in the Congress. But Norm taught me so much about politics and about life, and he was a nice guy, right? And I miss him terribly. But he had a huge impact on my life and my career going forward. And because we're focusing on lawyers, I didn't want Norm to get lost in the shuffles.
No, that's very important. Thank you. I want to bring Minister Ai here. Do you have any insights, either personally or things that the Japanese community, others may have, questions based on all we've been talking about?
Thank you. I briefly touched upon the context for this topic from the viewpoint of diplomat in my opening remark. But listening to Stuart, Erica, Shirley, and Phil made me realize that this theme actually is much deeper and broader than I had first imagined. So I'm very happy that you've done this, and the conversation doesn't seem to have an end to it. I'm a product of Japanese education, almost. Sporadically interrupted by and by American education from time to time, and I did go to law department in Japanese university, finished only 3 years out of 4, kicked out because some professors thought that additional 1 year studying law would not do much to me, and they recommended that I just go to the government and work for them. So I really can't claim myself to be having had legal education, but I did go to a graduate school here afterwards and studied international law. So I have a unique perspective of comparing how Japanese and American legal profession or law education approach, at least in the field of international law, and they were quite different. And that was a fascinating thing to realize. And from that by-system perspective, two different systems of legal profession, two different systems of legal procedure. Of all the differences, I think there are elements that resonate from what you had to say. I can't point my finger at what they are, but I can certainly see that there are things that would be relevant and meaningful to Japanese audience if they were here to listen to what you have to say. Your stories are all very unique, at the same time all very American experience, and infused with the background of being a minority. But for all that, I think there are elements of that resonate with other cultures and other legal backgrounds. So that's what I appreciated listening to you. And something about what Erica said, the sense of belonging. Somehow, I can't really understand why, but Japanese society, being as it is, we take for granted that we belong to the group. But I wonder if that's really true. Listen to you. We could have similar reaction to certain things, even though we are considered to be one group. And I really can't explain to you why I felt that way, but there's something in it, and I like to explore it further. But thank you all for giving me plenty of things to think about. Apart from my original interest and intent, this has been a very illuminating discussion for me, and I hope it was for the audience as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. I'd like to, at this point, give their certificates to the 3 people here and invite Julie Abo to come up and accept on behalf of Judge Uno, who can't be here with us today. He's here spiritually, I mean, with Mr. really gave us. So let's all stand up. I'll have the certificates over here. Again, I just want to say thank you. Erica, as a White House official, cannot accept an award of this kind, although she knows we're very grateful to her, and we're very appreciative of her having the ethics and the, it's good to have ethics in government. So again, thank you to everyone here. Let's have a round of applause for our let's just take a minute questions people have that have been raised for you, let's sit down.
I have a question.
We've got just a few more minutes. Are there any questions that have been raised for you? Is there a microphone?
in the back, wave his hand.
Way in the back, okay.
Well, not totally in the back. Anyway, this was an outstanding panel, and thank you for your hospitality. So my question is, how has this panel been accepted, like at the HBCUs, like at Bowie and UDC and Hampton and Howard? What was the reception that y'all got from speaking there?
Okay, so the question is, what have been the receptions that we've had at the historically black colleges and universities or at other places at UDC? Have we spoken there, and what type of reception have our stories gotten?
So I can speak from both a personal capacity and a professional capacity, and not in the collective, if that's okay. So the reception has been kind. It has. I have been other spaces where I've been, heckled and threatened, and that was not it. because the message that I bring is one of solidarity, is one of humility, is one of, and here I'm going to garble the Japanese again. It's not just kind of a little bit of a borrowing of Okage-sama Day about what me as a Japanese American civil rights lawyer owes black lawyers who carried this for us, and that I inherit just by sheer merit of other people's work. But it's also a matter of finding the common cause, approaching it with the knowledge that I don't know everything, and intentionally showing up with other allies to make sure that we see each other with our hands behind each other's back. And so it's been very gratifying to move through this space, even though my role at the White House, the title is Senior Liaison to the Asian American, Native Hawaiian, and Pacific Islander Communities. That's one of many things that I do. As a deputy to the president, I do whatever they want me to do, really. And execution and performance and building on and demonstrating and making good on his day one equity order, which crosses and interbraids all traditionally marginalized, traditionally disempowered people in this country, that's built on what the president has actually said is systemic racism. He names it. And I think that's pretty extraordinary because I would need to get clearance from my communications and White House ethics departments to be able to say that unless I'm quoting him. And so we're moving into those spaces with that kind of intentionality, also acknowledging the anti-blackness that exists in many Asian households and is expressed in horrific terms, and condemning those has been a powerful moment for me that I've been gratified to be able to serve in. So you're the only person who spoke at Bowie State? No one else has? It's okay if you haven't, I was just
Well,
curious.
I've spoken at UDC and have done events at Howard University. And I also have brought a delegation of black judges to Hart Mountain. If people are aware of our legal community, the chief judge of the DC Court of Appeals is a black female, and the chief now of the DC Superior Court is a black woman, and they're very dear friends of mine. So what I've tried to do in DC is engage the black community because they're my friends. That's what I grew up with in Michigan. And I think because they care about this story and they care about me, they want to be a part of it. And all these black judges that I work with in DC, they've all been to Hart Mountain. And I got to tell you, it's not an easy place to get to, but it was worth their while, and they've learned a lot. And we don't try to compare the suffering that the black community has had in this country with what happened to Japanese Americans. As my friend had said to me once, this isn't a contest. Suffering is suffering. Trauma is trauma. Whether you're black, white, Latino, or whatever, if you suffered, you've suffered. So thank you for that question.
But it's also really important to share the stories. During the course of my career, I spent a lot of time dealing with African American groups, hearing their stories, sharing my story. And I think that helped give a common understanding to where we are. It's interesting to me that ALDEF, one of the sponsors of this, is in the same collective in New York City with the other legal defense funds, including the NAACP Legal Defense Fund, the Inc. Fund that's famous for its work over many years. And the lessons that I learned from those lawyers at the Inc. Fund about the types of legal challenges that you needed to bring to make change was important to my career and important to moving the law forward. And, having met and worked with leaders from there over now many generations, it was a terrific ride.
Any other questions? Yeah, please.
Yeah, I've got one. I'm Dr. Jared Skillings. I'm the Chief Clinical Officer of the American Psychological Association. And my wife Julie's here with me. We're the two biggest members of the Shirley Higuchi fan club. So I just wanted to say congratulations to all of you. This was inspiring. And here was my question. It was wonderful to hear about the history and its deep, rich traditions, both across Asia and Hawaii and other places, the discrimination and the trauma. And when I heard that story, and I think about the polarization, personally, racially, politically in our society, I wondered if any of you had hopes that you might like to see that you could share for the legal profession, for our society, our world. What would you like to see us do better? Where should we go to improve things?
Well, I'll answer that question. I mean, Jared is my boss, so I have to be careful on what I say. But, I hate to be Pollyannish, and I am very Pollyannish. That's the other part of being Japanese American. You think everything's going to be okay, even when it looks like it might not be. But, Stuart, you mentioned Secretary Norman Mineta, who everyone I meet says he did so much for me. Well, he did a lot for me, and he was my hero. And we are building this center at Hart Mountain. Wyoming is a red state, a very conservative state, and we are now building the Mineta Simpson Institute. And I believe this place has a place for psychology, it has a place for this country, and it has a place to teach Americans, most specifically diplomats, elected officials, lawyers, politicians, professors, to come together to look at the best practices of the government and to look to ways to slowly chip away and create behavioral change for this country. Our mindset is so separated and divisive. We've got to figure out a way to change that. And so what we need is we have to agree what we can agree on and come together on common ground. So that's what I hope for this country, is that one day we'll wake up and we're not going to have this problem anymore, or else we don't have any hope for our children. We really don't.
Just the same way for the hope for our children. What gives me hope and inspiration, and is something that I intentionally try to put into practice, is to listen to our young leaders and not talk to our young leaders as if you are the future of leadership. They are leaders now, and they have so much wisdom to impart upon us in two ways. First of all, as Stuart mentioned, many of them are biracial or multiracial, and so this color blindness that people in the 70s and 80s grew up with, or earlier, I'm not making eye contact with anybody, no longer exists. And so allyship comes a little bit more naturally, and fellowship, and to seeing the common cause, and not letting us retreat into corners. But the second piece is, and again, I'm going to borrow your reflections, Stuart, is about how the Japanese American community is shifting, and it's generational. So I grew up in a multi-generational household where the first principle was do no shame on your family. It's not don't die, just don't shame. But the second one that is a little bit more relevant and not as dark is the nail that sticks up gets the hammer. And so integrating yourself, making yourself as invisible as possible, keeping your head down. Nobody's ever been punished for hard work kind of thing. Don't let them notice you. This was not my elders' lack of courage, it was the courage to survive. But I hold that in me. And guess what? My kids don't. They are getting mouthy, and they inspire me to recognize that maybe it's time for the nail to stick up and invite the hammer. And that's right, because otherwise nothing's going to get done. I mean, the status quo is not acceptable. People say, oh, the system's broken, we have to fix it. I don't think the system's broken. I think it's working exactly the way it was designed to, and that's what we have to disrupt. And it's the young leaders who are also our future, but they are leaders now that we need to be attentive to, and hope that they're tolerant of us.
We're in hard times now. It is divisive, it is a little scary, and when I think about that, and I think back to the Boy Scout Jamboree in Cody, Wyoming, when Alan Simpson and Norm Mineta shared a tent at the Jamboree, and strangers, right? Didn't know each other, but shared a tent and became friends that lasted a lifetime. That, I think, that back and forth, that talking to each other, that learning about each other's experiences led to a path forward that, frankly, no one could have predicted at the time. And I think that, you know, hearing the stories of various folks out there and hearing that people struggle, and hearing that the struggle against inequity is not somebody's own unique perspective, but that a lot of people are there and part of that. And hearing and sharing those stories is really important moving forward. And I think the more we do of that, and the more you can go to various communities and say, look, let me tell you my story and let me hear yours, is really important. And I think if we do that, and especially if we do that with our kids, because my kids were hammered down a lot, right? To the point where I was a little worried that the authorities might come and pay us a visit. That's important. That's important for the kids to know their story, know their various stories, to share them with their friends, and to hear their friends' stories.
We just want to say thank you to our panelists. Let's give a round of applause to everybody. Sincerely, that this program will inspire someone who's going to watch this video to maybe go to law school, maybe think of getting that skill. But remember, law is not the only skill. I mean, we have the psychology skill. I know one of my best experiences as a lawyer was working in a unit at Legal Services, which had 10 social workers and 8 lawyers. So we were able to get the temporary restraining order, and afterwards someone would talk to them about food stamps or about intergenerational trauma or something else. It's so important to have that holistic view. So we've heard that from our awardees here, and I hope it'll inspire other people to go to law school, and also to perhaps work with groups like ALDF, JCL. There's so many other good groups out there doing good work. And remember, we are part of a social justice ecosystem. We are not doing it alone, we're doing it together. So however you want to make the world a better place, please find other people who can do that with you. So again, thanks to Minister Ai and to the Embassy and the JICC, and thanks to all of you